for inviting me. Thank you all for being here. I saw some of our beautiful ACLU t-shirts over there.
Yes.
And I didn't see every hand go up when you asked about the ACLU. There are envelopes at the front table, and we will leave some here. There's so much to talk about, and almost none of it is good news. But I will start locally before we launch into what's happening at the federal level. Has anybody here not made up their mind about Proposition 200? Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about Proposition 200, which is on the ballot. Early voting has started, and you haven't heard much from the opposition to Proposition 200 because for a long time it looked like it may not make it to the ballot at all. There was a lot of infighting. The extremists were attempting to extreme each other out. Extreme, extremer, extremist. It is an organization replete with white supremacists, with strong associations with neo-Nazi and white supremacist organizations. And it is following the model of the Bush administration. And I should stop here. The ACLU is nonpartisan. If this were the Clinton administration or the Kennedy administration, we would be saying the same thing in criticizing the administration. It is because of what they are doing, not who they are, and not what their party is. But the fact is that they are shredding the Bill of Rights, and they're using fear to do it. I always contrast the Roosevelt administration after World War II and after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when he said we have nothing to fear but fear itself, and contrast this administration, which is using fear and using 9/11 so cynically and so mercilessly to try to convince us that it's okay for them to shred the Bill of Rights. Prop 200 is in that same model. Proposition 187 in California was found unconstitutional, and this is the way the extreme right wing does things. They start in one state. If it's declared unconstitutional, they fix it in the next state. It's always seemed to me that while Arizona is a desert, it's really very fertile ground for every right-wing wacko idea that comes along, takes root very easily, and then spreads like a weed across the country. This is an anti-immigrant, anti-American proposition. It has three parts to it, Proposition 200. The first would require proof of citizenship at the ballot box and at the time of registration. Right now, you check the box and you affirm that you're a citizen. You put down your place of birth, and generally it is believed that you are telling the truth. You do so under oath. This would change that. It is an anti-American act because, and I really want to leave you with this if nothing else, the provisions would happen to every single one of us, not just those people. Now that's another technique. We have those people and we get assured, oh, this is not going to impact you. It's just those people and we've got to get control of them. We are those people. It would require proof of citizenship, not just legal status here, but actual citizenship to access any public benefit. Right now, undocumented people cannot get welfare or other benefits. So what do they mean by this? Do they mean the parks? Do they mean the libraries? Do they mean getting a driver's license? We know also undocumented people can't do that in Arizona. So are we going to have to show our passports or birth certificates? Or if the feds have their way, a national ID card which says whether or not we're citizens before we can sit on a park bench or take a book out of the library? The language of this is so broad that I think that's a real possibility, that the courts would find that that's what they do. This also, ironically enough, impacts Native Americans specifically on having to prove that they are citizens. They're the original citizens. And yet, let me tell you how ironic all of this is. Some of you may remember that a year or two ago or more, we, by initiative, decided that bilingual education was not appropriate, that people weren't becoming real Americans because of bilingual education. And bilingual education was limited to 1 or 2 years in the public schools. And then everybody had to be taught exclusively in English. Now, those people that everybody had in mind on that initiative were clearly Spanish speakers emigrating to this country from Mexico, Central and South America. The first school that is being told that it will lose its funding is a school, an Arizona public school on the Navajo Reservation in Window Rock. And we're involved helping them to make sure that doesn't happen. The last provision of the Proposition 200 is that, and this is really amazing, that it is the responsibility of a public employee to not only verify that the person applying for a public benefit is a citizen, but they also have to report it to the authorities and to immigration. And if they fail to do so, they themselves will be prosecuted for a crime. I don't see how anybody thinks this is enforceable, tenable, or acceptable. Governor Napolitano directed all of her departments in the state to come up with a budget analysis of what this would cost to implement. And I don't even think that they counted bailing people out of jail. But it's just in the millions and millions of dollars. So please, 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 when you vote, vote no on Proposition 200. It's cynically entitled the Arizona Taxpayer and Citizen Protection Act. It protects no one. And it's being promoted by a group called PAN, the Protect Arizona Now. And some of these crazy people actually think that those immigrants who are coming here either fleeing from repressive governments or just seeking to be able to make a living are the first wave of the war that Mexico is waging to take back their land. I mean, it is totally, totally insane. I'll move on now to what's going on at the federal level. I've talked that there are so many familiar faces, and I've talked with you before about the USA Patriot Act, and I will review that. But you have some papers in front of you that say urgent, 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 urgent on the top. And you don't need to look at them now, but let me tell you what they're about, and then you could look at them at your leisure for more details and for action on your part. Some of you may remember that the son of the USA Patriot Act, USA Patriot Act 2, the Security Enhancement Act of 2003 was its official name, was leaked by somebody in the Justice Department to an organization in Washington called the Center for Public Integrity. What a concept. And they in turn leaked it to the press. And we thought, well, that's that. For a while, we were sort of sanguine that it wouldn't see the light of day because there really was an uproar. It contains provisions that, among other things, John Ashcroft can strip you, again, those people is us. That John Ashcroft could strip you of your citizenship on any unarticulated basis and presumably without probable cause, without any court action, without any objective review by a court, could simply strip you because he doesn't like you or thinks you're a terrorist or thinks you know terrorists or whatever he thinks, if he thinks, and could send you then, could deport you to a country that practices torture. Now, of course, we know, so do we, but could actually deport you to a country that practices torture and that has an unstable government, a country not of your choice. It has more draconian provisions than you can imagine and extends to immigrants an even unfriendlier hand than in the past. The due process rights of immigrants have been totally done away with. This was actually happening even before 9/11, but 9/11 really put us over the top in that regard. Obviously, especially for people of Middle Eastern descent. What you have that says urgent, 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 two pieces. One deals with what's happening in the House of Representatives and the other in the Senate. And I am going to beseech you. At the end of these talks, very often people say, well, what can we do? And I know how hopeless a lot of people feel and how powerless. But let me tell you, the main objective of everybody in Washington who holds office is to hold on to that office. And you still can make an impact if you call and say, you know, I voted for you last time, but not again. I contributed to your campaign, but not again. I am a constituent, I vote. I will not be voting for you, and I will try and convince everybody else I know to not vote for you. It still does make a difference, and we've got to do it. Got to wake up every morning and send somebody an email or make a phone call or send a fax. Can't send letters anymore. Used to be most effective, but now it has to go through 6 weeks of security before it reaches its intended recipient. So often it's too late. But this you must act on. It would provide for a national ID card. They call it a standardized driver's license, which would indicate whether or not you are a citizen. And the next step, logically, is, and for anybody who drives, you have to carry it with you at all times. That doesn't sound like the America that we know. It sounds like some other countries and other times that I won't mention. Show me your papers. That's not the way we do it. And I've actually suggested that a driver's license, you can lose it, you can forget that it's in your pocket and put it in the laundry, so maybe we should just go straight to tattoos. Then they'll know who we are. It would take away whatever is remaining of due process for immigrants. You can read about it, and on the back of one of the sheets we have the contacts for you, for phone contacts, so you have no excuse to not call. The House on Friday passed a version of the bill. Other parts of USA Patriot Act 2, and you have the paper on that, have been attached to innocuous bills, emergency bills, budget bills, reauthorization bills, and they are sneaking it by. I've told you previously that USA Patriot Act 1 has taken away your privacy, not just the privacy of those people, your privacy. Those people are us these days. I can't say that often enough because you really need to know it. You really need to know it and own it. They have taken away the privacy that previously, by federal mandate, ironically, protected student records, financial records, business records, health records, travel plans. They are building databases about us that will allow them to know everything about us. And even then they make mistakes. I know people who are on the no-fly list. Any of you have ever had trouble at the airport? If not, you're really lucky. There are a lot of people who find themselves on a no-fly list. They can't find out why they're on the no-fly list. I know somebody who found out that he didn't belong on the no-fly list. His name is John Smith. He's one of many John Smiths. He's not the John Smith that they had in mind. And yet he can't get off the no-fly list. There is no provision, no way to get off the no-fly list. He has a letter from somebody in the administration in TSA or Homeland Security somewhere that says this is not the John Smith who belongs on the no-fly list. And yet every time he goes to the airport, he is harassed. He's detained, and he can't fly. Happened to Ted Kennedy. It happened to Cat Stevens, who's now a Muslim and came into this country. And that's interesting about Cat Stevens, because that could happen to you. Let's say that you get a letter from an organization which purports to be working for peace in the Middle East. It doesn't even have anything to do with Iraq. It has to do generally with peace in the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, whatever the context is. And they seem very credible to you, and they ask you for support for their work. You believe in peace in the Middle East. We all want peace in the Middle East. And you send them a check for $25. Sometime after that, John Ashcroft or somebody in the State Department decides that that organization is actually not working for peace in the Middle East. It's a terrorist organization, or a terrorist-affiliated organization, or a terrorist-supported organization, or has a member who thinks that he or she is a terrorist. You have just supported a terrorist organization, and John Ashcroft will strip you of your citizenship. This is happening. We have people who have been in prison for years, sometimes in military prisons or Navy brigs, without having been charged with a crime, without having an opportunity to see a lawyer, which is not much of an opportunity these days because John Ashcroft has declared by executive order that the government can listen in on conversations between a client and an attorney. I would suggest to you it's impossible to prepare for a fair trial or have a fair trial under those circumstances. But these folks have absolutely no rights, and the government actually said, well, we're not going to give them a lawyer or a trial. If they thought they had hope for that, they wouldn't give us the information that we want. I think that's a form of torture, and certainly violates the Bill of Rights. And even this Supreme Court agreed and told President Bush that war did not give him a blank check to simply set aside the Bill of Rights. Two people who have been very much in the news and whose cases reached the Supreme Court were Hamdi and Jose Padilla. Both of them U.S. citizens, both of them years in prison. The deal was made with Hamdi that he renounce his citizenship and be deported to the Middle East, and he has to report in if he's thinking about being a terrorist. There was no proof that he ever was a terrorist. He was actually never charged. Jose Padilla's case arrived at the Supreme Court by a path that the Supreme Court said was not the correct path. You know, those mere technicalities in the law. And so his case was rejected, but I think the message is loud and clear. Hamdi was picked up on foreign soil, and the administration argued that that was sufficient cause to be able to declare him an enemy combatant and hold him forever and ever. And the Supreme Court said no. Jose Padilla was picked up on U.S. soil, and the court hasn't spoken yet because of the procedural issues, but I think it's pretty clear that they're going to have to do something about that. The court also heard from those people who are being held in Guantanamo, citizens or otherwise. And even there, the court said that if the United States is holding people, incarcerating them, without charges, that even the people in Guantanamo are entitled to access to the United States court and to a meaningful hearing on charges that they are advised of. We have guarantees in our Constitution. We have the right to know what the charges are. We have the right to counsel. We have the right to a speedy and public trial. And we have the right to confront the witnesses against us. This administration has simply ignored all of those guarantees. Now, the Constitution doesn't give us rights that a government, even under a national security emergency, can take away. That's not the way it works. That's not what the Constitution does. I always ask people, what rights are we given by the First Amendment? And everybody knows free speech, free press, and I say no, no, no. And it's a trick question. The genius of our Constitution that it recognizes that as sentient human beings in the United States, we have certain rights and constrains government from taking them away. One of your favorites is the very first phrase of the very, very first amendment, and it doesn't say you have the right to be free from government interference in your exercise of religion or the establishment of religion. It says Congress shall make no laws. That is what our Constitution is all about. Limitation on government. Probably the worst thing that has happened is that the very, very carefully crafted and constructed system of checks and balances that has kept us safe from government tyranny as a whole and from government tyranny at any branch of government, legislative, judicial, or executive, is no longer in existence. I've mentioned a couple of times things that John Ashcroft can unilaterally do. And the Bush administration has, without consultation, not just on the decision to go to Iraq, and however you feel about that, I think that there is agreement that he didn't spend a whole lot of time really talking to Congress, really talking to experts, and yet here we are. Very, very few people know this. One of his first official acts when George W. Bush took office was, with the stroke of a pen, to repeal a long-standing rule that after a president is gone from the White House for 12 years, his papers, one of the few occasions I don't have to say his or hers, his papers, our papers, become public, to be vested in the Smithsonian, in the Library of Congress, in a presidential library, so that we and historians and scholars and academics can have access to them. No longer true. Stroke of a pen. No consultation, very little publicity. This administration is the most secret administration that we have ever experienced, and both the USA Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act contribute and support that secrecy. The Homeland Security Act, and I've done I don't know how many debates with the U.S. Attorney on the USA Patriot Act, and I always implore people to say, don't title it the USA Patriot Act. It's bigger than that. It's national security versus liberty. And it's not even that. The ACLU believes that we can be safe and free, that we ought not to have to choose. We also believe that what the administration is doing is not making us safe, but it is making us less free. And I'll talk about some examples of that. And it is not just the USA Patriot Act. It's the USA Patriot Act, it's the Homeland Security Act, it's a whole slew of executive orders, it's a whole slew of decisions made in the executive branch that have brought power more and more into the executive branch to the exclusion of the other branches. Thank goodness the Supreme Court, which is hardly a radical, liberal, or progressive Supreme Court, understood a little bit about what was going on, and by narrow margins, they have stopped the administration on a number of issues. Thank goodness for that. But it hasn't been easy, and we still have lots and lots of cases that are working their way up to the Supreme Court. In the Homeland Security Act, I was talking about your privacy and secrecy. In the Homeland Security Act, there is a provision that anybody, and that includes corporations, can just make sort of a phone call and report that you're engaged in some activity that the government ought to be aware of. And that information is secret, except for the government. You can't find out who said it, and you may not be able to find out who said what. You just know that the FBI or the CIA is in your business. And if you do manage to find out, and it won't be through FOIA, through the Freedom of Information Act, because that is specifically exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. Even if what they said is untrue, even if it's malicious, known to be untrue, and they said it anyway, they're immune from suit. You can't sue them in a civil court. I'm going to deviate now because I just said the word court again, and it reminds me that I have to tell you about some other things that are happening in Congress. We managed to defeat, fairly narrowly, but we did it, the marriage amendment. Congress is all hot and bothered about a whole bunch of issues, and for most of them, if you peel back the cover, religion is at the bottom of it. Very, very, actually not the bottom, close to the surface. But what they are doing, maybe because the court stepped up to the plate and put some stops on the administration, they are engaging in court stripping. Several of the amendments would say, for instance, the marriage amendment, one man, one woman, would have said that no court could entertain a challenge. This would have been the very, very first time in our nation's history, had it passed, that the Constitution would have been amended to take away rights, or to make sure that there were rights that some of us get to exercise and other people didn't. It would have been the first provision that was discriminatory. And at the bottom of it, obviously, is a right-wing Christian agenda. We also have the flag desecration amendment, which at this point may actually pass. There is also an amendment that would, where are my notes here? I'm sorry. The use of the Constitution, there's the Pledge of Allegiance, which is under God. And they're acting as if you can't say the pledge. You can say the pledge, whether or not it has under God in it. We said the pledge for many, many years without under God in it, even though it was written by a Baptist minister. And again, this would strip the courts of the jurisdiction and ability to hear any cases, which also means that the check and balance of the court telling the legislature what it did is unconstitutional goes. But even beyond that, I remember my most embarrassing moment in law school was objecting to something in the Constitution. And I said, well, that's unconstitutional. And the professor rightly said, it is the Constitution. And that would be the case here if any of the amendments were actually to pass. Do I think any of them would pass because, you know, they have to be ratified by the states? I don't think so. I think it's pure politics, and I think it's just awful. So we've got flag desecration, federal marriage, Pledge of Allegiance, all of them attempting to amend the Constitution in the wrong direction and stripping the courts of their authority to act. The Intelligence Reform Bill is not a constitutional amendment, but it does incorporate a lot of taking back. Again, you have those urgent, and I urge you to do something about that. Let me tell you why, before we go on, I have to leave early. I'm sure you all know that Tempe is the site of the final presidential campaign debate. And actually, starting yesterday, a lot of activists have been holding various events, and there are plans throughout Wednesday for marches, for rallies, for actions, days of honoring the dead in Iraq and protesting the war. There's going to be an unemployment line that's been organized by people. There's an anti-military that's going to take place at the recruiting station. The ACLU's role in these events has been to train and to manage legal observation at events. A lot of you know that I was arrested at a protest a number of years ago. And the police said that I hit a horse.
You did.
But he hit first.
There were several
His tail.
other people who were arrested, and the charges against all of them were dismissed. And the government decided that they were going to make an example of the executive director of the ACLU, and they were prosecuting me. I don't know if they would have been successful if the prosecution had gone forward. But because somebody had a videotape that showed that the horse hit me first, the charges were dismissed. And we realized at that point how important it was to have legal observers at any demonstration. And we would provide them for anybody who asked. The pro-war folks or the pro-Bush folks haven't asked us. But you will see us at any demonstration and any rally, any march, wearing bright yellow t-shirts that say ACLU Legal Observer. And we have actually developed good working relationships with the Phoenix Police Department, especially their community force. Chief Tranter of Tempe, much to my delight, called me and said, can we talk before these events unfold? We shared a lot of the same concerns. We are training legal observers up and down the state and have been doing so for 2 years. We ask people to give up their own First Amendment rights to help assure that others can exercise theirs. Because legal observers are neutral parties whose job is to be there but be apart from the event itself and to document by videotape, by audio, by taking notes. All of these, which could be immeasurably helpful if people are in fact arrested, and I am anticipating that there will be mass arrests now. The level of testosterone and anxiety amongst law enforcement goes up depending not just on how many people are there, but if one of them is the president, then the level is very, very high. And in fact, the SS is in charge, the Secret Service. And things are very fluid. Chief Tranter has assured me that in his view, Tempe is a free speech zone. You all saw in Boston, free speech zone was a cage. In New York, free speech and the First Amendment lost to a lawn because the city of New York successfully argued that the care and feeding of the great lawn in Central Park was more important than people's right to exercise their First Amendment rights. So it's a sad, sad state of affairs. And I will be doing the last legal observer training. Now, I know that Susan said you have to stay and do a business meeting. But if anybody is interested in attending the legal observer training, we've got a lot of territory to cover. We've got the campus, the area around Gamage, downtown, the military recruiting area. We could use people. And that training is at 11. And if you stay, it's okay to be a minute late. You get there. At the law school, almost right across the street, room 105. So if you're interested, you would be welcome. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. And we have lots of time. So, yes.
Yeah. What's the I lost.
Yes.
The state constitutions are legal under the federal constitution, right?
A state constitution has to meet or exceed the standard. Arizona and other constitutions, the more modern constitutions, are generally more generous in protection of our rights.
Well, anyway, I have a question about the state constitution, because I'm aware that, when Oregon, I think it was Oregon, passed the right to die, that the federal government stepped in and blocked that, not only once but twice. And was it Ashcroft both times?
Yes.
Okay. But anyway, because they gave some reason that it was illegal. And So, but here about, I don't know, time escapes me, maybe 15, 20 years ago or something like that, we had referendums under our state constitution. I understand all states don't have them, but we have it in our constitution. And we had a referendum about English would be the official language, and yet Rose Moffett was the governor at the time, and she just went right ahead and had everything printed in 2 languages, and I never did understand that. At that
Well,
time,
there are a couple of questions there. The jurisdiction, and I'm not going to get into a treatise. By the way, I'm really also fond of telling people I'm a lawyer in California, but a human being in Arizona. I've not taken the bar exam here and won't. I don't practice law, and I don't give legal advice. And I'm not going to do a treatise on jurisdiction and federal versus state jurisdiction. But the United States Supreme Court does have jurisdiction very often, even over matters that involve state constitutions. And they certainly can resolve a conflict between a state constitution and a federal constitution. And the federal constitution wins. But here's what happened with English only. And let me also, there are 2 ways that something can get on the ballot. One is by referendum, and one is by initiative. Referendum is something that comes out of the legislature and is referred to the ballot for action by the people. The initiative comes from the people. There is a group which decides that an issue is important and that they have a solution. Medical marijuana, Prop 200, the PAN initiative, and those are 2 ways that our voices can be heard. By the way, there are a couple of ballot initiatives now and referenda that are really anti-democratic, small d, and anti-people, that will make it more difficult to get an initiative on the ballot. And I'm voting no on whatever. The initiative, and I don't remember, I wasn't here, I think, when the initiative or referendum on English only was passed. But immediately it was challenged in the courts. And the Arizona Supreme Court issued one of the strongest and best decisions anywhere in the country which had an English only rule and said it's unconstitutional. And it,
to the state constitution?
yes. And it based its decision largely on the right of an individual to communicate with the government, to seek redress of grievances or for whatever other reason. Federal law requires that if there is a significant population with a primary language other than English for voting purposes, ballots must reflect that and be published in those languages. I think San Francisco has ballots and ballot information in Spanish and Chinese and possibly a couple others.
It wasn't just ballot.
No, I understand that. Exactly. And the bilingual hasn't been challenged yet. I think it probably conflicts with the English only because it's pretty damn close to it. And we will probably be challenging it. There'll probably be court action around the Window Rock School issue. So we'll see what happens there. Does that answer the question? And there's always, I haven't begun to talk about the Arizona legislature. Somebody asked me about Prop 200. They said, well, the people at Prop 200 said it's not their intent to be discriminatory, and it's not their intent to do this. And they asked the legal question of very often intent is a factor when a court reviews something. That really mostly is legislative intent. And then I went on to say, if there's a legislative history from a deliberative body, or even from the Arizona legislature, then the courts would consider that. You'll all come down to the legislature sometime. It's just amazing. They have, in the past, undone the will of the people by fiat when the people have acted Medical marijuana is one of them. And people have acted through initiative. They have undone it. One of the ballot issues that's on that you'll be voting on would require that when an initiative is on the ballot, that the source of money is also there, provided for. Well, that's their job, to give us what our government is supposed to give us. If our government doesn't support education, which it doesn't, at least at the legislative level, and we pass an initiative, they can't undo it. That's what I meant by some of these bills are anti-democratic and ballot measures are anti-democratic and anti-American. Yes?
First, I wanted to thank you for the work that you're going to be doing to try to secure people's rights when this debate is coming in. It's wonderful. I want to push you back a little outside and ask about what the ACLU is doing on something larger, which is, I noticed that at the annual convention in San Francisco, your keynote speaker was the great investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. And he was talking about his investigation for his book that has now come out called Chain of Command, and he was talking about the hideous crimes and other abuses in Abu Ghraib by the Americans. And he told you, because I watched this online, he told you that he had evidence, he had videotape and photographs of our people raping Iraqi children. Okay, these images, as far as I know, and I certainly couldn't necessarily know, they're not out. I think if they came out, in my opinion, unlettered as it is, I think it would just blow up the Muslim world. If you want to see people just lose their mind, show them Americans raping their children. But I was glad to see the ACLU having that kind of a speaker, because we already do know that there was a methodical campaign underway at the highest level of our government to desecrate the human rights law. And I'm wondering what the ACLU is planning as a follow-up to what they heard from Seymour Hersh, because we absolutely have documents from the White House counsel to Bush, flat out saying, and I have to paraphrase it, I'm not a lawyer, but flat out saying, unless you get rid of the Genevas, you have personal liability for what's to come. And I think that may have been what started the whole thing that desecrated 50 years of human rights law. And then all the collaborative crap that came out of the Ashcroft department.
What is the ACLU doing about that? A lot of the work we're doing, and one of the reasons that you don't see more lawsuits addressing substantive issues is, again, because we can't find out what they're doing. And Seymour Hersh also acknowledged that it's very difficult. I don't know how many of you know Seymour Hersh, writes for the New Yorker and actually exposed Levi and other issues coming out of the Vietnam War. And usually at ACLU conferences, I come away really energized and raring to go. And this one, I came away depressed when people like Seymour Hersh said, I just don't know what we can do. I just don't know what we're going to do.
Jerry Falwell is a good start.
Very, very scary. But what we're generally doing is first trying to get the information. A lot of the suits start with a request for information, which is denied, a formal FOIA request, which is denied, a court order ordering the government to give us the information, from which the government takes an appeal and doesn't rush forward with it. And it's standard practice that when a trial court, the lowest court, issues an order and an appeal is filed, the order of the trial court is stayed. It doesn't go into effect. So we're often stuck because we simply can't get the information we need, the factual information, which it might be the basis for a lawsuit.
Can the soldiers there that are witnessing this, either visually or through cameras, is it against their code of entry into the services to share it with people like you?
It probably is, and one of the things that Seymour Hersh said was that you all remember Daniel Ellsberg. You know, he's still a hero, and he also was at the ACLU conference. And he agreed with Seymour Hersh that there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to stand up and be counted. So it's very, very difficult. I can't answer specifically on that case. There may be something on the ACLU website. Very often, even if I have a lot of information, it's still at a stage where it ought not to be broadcast. So my answer is I don't know specifically on that case. But we finally had another success, but the judge at the trial level stayed his own order without even being asked because he was leaving the government time to appeal. And under the USA Patriot Act, the government could use something called a national security letter. Didn't have to go get a warrant, didn't have to go get a subpoena. They just send you a national security letter that says, show up and bring your firstborn son and all of your documents and open your house to us. And you have no recourse. And the law also provided a gag order, so you couldn't tell anybody. And the court said you couldn't do that. Actually, I think it was that court that said secrecy is the enemy of democracy. So we're working on it, yes.
What is the position of the ACLU on corporate personhood? It seems to me that that takes away the rights of people.
Well, I don't know what the official ACLU position is. My position is it was a mistake. It should never have happened. Did you all hear the question?
No.
The Supreme Court years and years and years and years ago agreed that a corporation could be a person for the purpose of exercising rights. And that, I think, has caused an awful lot of mischief because we see cases with advertising that lure people into to smoking. And one of their arguments is always, hey, we're a person, we have free speech rights. We're covered under the Bill of Rights, we have personhood. Whether that's challengeable, I don't know. Times do change. You know, our legal system is built on precedents. So if there's a case that says a corporation is a person, it's very, very hard to get a reversal of that. Although Roe versus Wade is one vote away. One vote away, women's right to choose. One vote away from the Supreme Court. A lot of decisions in this Supreme Court have been 5-4. Yes?
You've given us the Washington telephone numbers. How does that compare with calling locally? Is it more effective to call with the Washington? And what if we call both?
Calling both is good. I think it is more effective to call Washington because it's more immediate. There will be a time during the day that a senator or representative will talk to one of their staff on the ground in D.C. But it may be a staff-to-staff in terms of constituent offices. So it is more likely to get there. And they will keep track of the number of calls. And, you know, I know in the Arizona legislature, if they get 4 calls, they go to 0. Doesn't take all that much. Yes?
Illegal immigration is a fact that billions have come in, burdening the southwestern states with the demands for services, etc. Is there an ACLU policy regarding a possible solution to that problem?
We recognize that a country has a right to protect its borders. We also firmly believe that it has to be done in a humane way. Back in the 70s, there was an IRCA, the Immigration Reform Control Act, which said that the government was going to take a new approach. The question was, does the ACLU have a policy because migrants are illegally streaming in and burdening the Southwest states? First, let me tell you what happened. Operation Gatekeeper was put in place a number of years ago, which effectively shut down the borders in California and across Texas. So everybody is funneled through Arizona and a little bit of New Mexico, which is why hundreds of people are dying in the desert, and which is why we have a huge, very troublesome vigilante movement in southern Arizona. The FBI just arrested 3 members of a vigilante support group who, and I don't remember which neo-Nazi group they belong to, but it's a national movement. So we believe that it has to be done humanely and that we can't relinquish law and order to vigilantes. And that the answer is not at the border, the answer is in immigration reform, generally and totally. What IRCA did was say IRCA is going to be on employers, because that's why people come here. There's a whole mythology about our immigration policy and why people come to this country. They come because they think they can make a living, but it's almost always been economic. You know, I just love the fact that Puritans emigrated to escape from political repression and prejudice and started burning people at the stake. You know, so we really have to look at our immigration policy from forever and ever. You need labor, so you let the Irish in to build railroads. You need labor in this area, so you let people in to do this and to do that. Which is not to say that there aren't people who do come for freedom, but a lot of people also confuse freedom with consumerism. What we believe is that we need reform, and basically we're waiting to review the Bracero programs, the guest worker programs, the various programs that are being proposed, which might benefit migrants and which would also benefit the United States. It's the immigration policy itself, including Operation Gatekeeper, that's created this situation. But I would also suggest to you that the tourism industry in Arizona would dry up and go away without migrant labor.
That's right.
That the food on our
Just
tables
want to take care of it.
would be a lot more expensive without migrant labor. And if we're going to do something about it, then we really need to think it through. We have a habit, I think, in this country of not thinking ahead and trying to figure out what the unintended consequences are of our own actions. For instance, who armed Saddam Hussein? Who trained Saddam Hussein? Papa Bush actually did that. So I think that we have to do something. I think people who have been here for years and years and years and years and years, who work and who pay taxes, contribute more than they take. They are not entitled to anything except emergency medical services, police and fire protection. And we're not sure under Prop 200 if they would get the emergency police and fire protection. Prop 200 says that they're not entitled to any benefits that we're, if we don't have our citizenship papers with us, entitled to any benefits that aren't federally mandated, and that's primary education and emergency medical services. So there's a lot of mythology, both about why people come and who comes. Our policies have always been racist and discriminatory and uneven, and we've got to do something about it, but we've got to do it right. And it's not the job of the ACLU, thank goodness, to come up with necessarily what we should do. It's our job to tell the government and hope that they're not doing it right and holding them accountable, and to tell them when they're doing it right and wrong. And we do both. Yes?
I just want to say one thing on Prop 200. From what I can gather and from people I've talked to, it's not only is it important for you to vote against it, but it's important for you to tell a lot of others, because from what I hear, it is way ahead of the polls.
Yeah, as I said, the opposition got off to a very slow and late start, because it really did look like they weren't going to make it to the ballot that they have, and we're playing catch up. So thank you for that comment. You're absolutely right. And if you want to volunteer, there are going to be people walking door to door. Oh, let me tell you something else that the ACLU is very, very involved in now. No wonder I'm tired. The Maricopa County Election Department is holding in a suspense file approximately 8,000 voter registrations because the people didn't check the citizenship box. There are two boxes. They're little, they're easy to overlook, but there are two boxes that you have to check. One is, I'm of an age that it's legal for me to vote. and the other is I'm a citizen. Further on in the body of a registration form, it asks you what your birth date is, and it asks you where you were born. Now, they will deduce from your birth date how old you are, and will process your registration form even if you haven't checked the age box. And at the bottom, you sign an affirmation, an oath that you're qualified, including you're a citizen. They will not deduce from your place of birth that you're a citizen, and that's pursuant to an Arizona statute. So there may be 8,000 people who are eligible to vote who will not be able to vote. And it's my understanding that there's no plan to allow them to vote provisionally. You know, if you go to the polls and something is questionable, generally you get to vote a provisional ballot, which gets sealed in an envelope and put in a place separate from the other ballot which have been passed. So we're dealing with that issue, and there's an awful lot of concern about harassment going on in minority areas when people go to vote. It's a fine Arizona tradition, begun, I believe, by William Rehnquist, who used to go down to minority areas and harass people who were trying to vote.
In fact,
saying things like,
my best friend's first time of voting at 32nd Street and 32nd Street in McDowell, where approximately with the precinct, my now best friend was stopped by William Rehnquist and forced to identify himself. He's Hispanic.
yeah, and ask questions like, did you pay your utility bill? Giving somebody the impression, who may not be very sophisticated, that the utility bills had to be paid before they could vote. And a lot of people got turned away. And we preceded Florida by decades. And we're very, very concerned about that. There was a recent survey, and we know how trustworthy surveys may be, but this one I think is irrefutable. 87% of the people in the United States have concerns about the integrity of our election process and voting.
And the 17% doesn't give a damn.
Yes.
A lot of us were upset and concerned about the Supreme Court's decision under God, but and the reason that they gave us the Michael Luda didn't have the standing in the case, etc.
Can't hear.
What is the, I'm talking about the under God decision in the pledge, and what is the reason that somebody who does have standing, I mean, there are plenty of non-believers in this country.
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is, isn't that eligible for a class action suit? I mean, all these people who feel it doesn't belong could bring a class action suit.
The question was the Supreme Court decision leaving standing the Declaration of Independence, inclusion of under God, and why isn't there a class action lawsuit? Other individual suits have been filed. Standing means, for a court, it's a bottom line requirement before a lawsuit can be heard by a court, that the person bringing the lawsuit have standing. That is, that they have rights that are going to be denied or have been injured. Michael Ludow was not the custodial parent, and the court found that stripped him of standing to hear the case. Mystery is why they accepted, knowing that. There are plenty of cases on standing that they didn't need to articulate that rule. It's not something that lends itself to, you bring a class action suit mostly for damages, and this is a suit not for damages, not for monetary compensation, but for a principle. It's asking for what is it. You either ask for money or you ask the court to tell somebody to do something or not to do something. And those kinds of cases are used to be called cases arising in equity, because you're not asking for money, you're asking for equity, you're asking for fairness or that some wrong be righted. And that's what this suit was about. This suit was about getting a declaration, essentially, declaratory relief that under God violates the First Amendment. So it's not the sort of thing that I think would lend itself to a class action suit. And I believe that some other suits, at least one other has already been filed by somebody who does have standing.
Has the ACLU been involved?
Sure. Sure. It's not here in Arizona, but we've been involved. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question yet?
Did you say that even if you signed that you're a citizen, that they won't let you vote if you were born somewhere else? Is that what you said?
No, what I said was, unlike age, which they will deduce from your birthday,
Right.
and the fact that you signed under oath, they will not do the same for citizenship, even if you wrote down that you were born in Phoenix, Arizona. And there are citizens, of course, who were not born here, who were naturalized. But even if you were born here, and you say so, and you sign it under oath, they won't deduce that, and it's because of an Arizona statute. And we may have to challenge it. The head of the elections department here in Maricopa County is really wonderful, and she would do the right thing if she could.
So if
What
I
they-
was born in Poland and I signed that I was a citizen, it wouldn't count?
It wouldn't count even if you were born in Phoenix, unless you check the box.
Oh, you have to check the box.
Did you not? Okay, so
I might have missed this because I've been walking around the room, but you mentioned briefly that there was some legislation afoot that would prevent anyone from ever suing or challenging the under God clause, that they were going to pass a law saying that the justices or the Supreme Court would never be able to hear this. What is the status of that? Do you know?
it is the Pledge Protection Act of 2003. And it would deprive the courts, including the United States Supreme Court, from reviewing cases involving the Pledge of Allegiance. And,
Is that unconstitutional?
well, it would be the Constitution.
I know, it's like what you were saying, is that unconstitutional? How can they? It's like an oxymoron, actually, too, or
Well,
something.
you know, as I said, there's the issue itself, and then there's the court stripping issue, which they're engaged in, which would further damage the system of checks and balances. Very, very dangerous.
So where is this bill now?
It's on its way. It's passing.
Is that to change the Constitution so it has to be ratified?
Yes.
That's the
It
change.
is a constitutional amendment. Yes.
Slightly off-beat topic. The United States versus the Church and State of course, the Prime Minister. In Great Britain, the Anglican Church is, I believe, the official state religion. The monarch is to have both church and state. That's right. Is there any difference in the degree of religious and civil liberties between these countries?
Yes. They have.
Could you repeat the question?
Um,
Is there a difference in these two?
we've had a coup in this country, in my view, and that's me speaking, not the ACLU. I have to distinguish. But we have had, I think, a revolution in the revival of fundamentalism and the rise to power of the radical movements right wing. I'm on a personal campaign to not allow these folks to call themselves conservatives. They're not conservatives. They're extremists. And they told us 40 years ago what they were going to do, what their objective was, and how they were going to do it. And we were feeling real good because we ended the war in Vietnam, and we started the women's movement and the environmentalist movement. And I think one of the things that happened was that we were pretty proud of ourselves, got a little cocky, and even more dangerously, sort of split up into single issue groups. The environment is more important than women's rights. Women's rights are more important than workers' rights. And we stopped talking to each other, and profoundly dangerous, we stopped realizing that everything is connected. That you can't talk about women's rights without talking about workers' rights, without talking about kids' education, and without talking about everything else. And in the meantime, they have a very, very simple message, the extremists. And they started with the school boards, and then city council, boards of supervisors, state legislatures, and now essentially they hold the Supreme Court Congress and the White House,
Which is everything.
which is everything.
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.